Welcome to How It Works with Holger Live. I think this works. If somebody could let me know if you have audio and picture, you should see me right now in the middle of your screen. This is completely new for me. This is my first live broadcast that I organize myself. Usually I participate in Embarcadero events or TMS events, so this is a first for me. So how did the idea for How It Works with Holger come up? Well, the thing is, if you watch How It Works with Holger as a recording, you do not have the ability to ask any questions. So I thought it might be nice if you're able to ask questions while I present the content. Of course, I realize this is not something that is being built with one appointment or whatever, so it takes time to get the ball rolling. So that's why I'm going to start with a very, very small subject today, just to get the ball rolling and to trigger more interest in the stream, to be honest. So let me switch to my slides. This is all new, so hopefully now you will see my desktop with the first slide. Looks pretty good. Sound a little low. Yeah, it's full here. It's in the red, so I think that is something they do when they encode things. So if I were to increase the volume, it would be too loud and it would get jittery. So hi Helge, how are you? Thanks for helping me with the appointment. So that was literally a mistake in the documentation. So I'm number one person who always says like read the documentation first, but that actually was something that stood in the way of getting this started, because like the documentation said you have to use the time in Pacific, which is 3 hours back from where I am. So I schedule it for 8 o'clock, which is 11 o'clock in the morning here. And then everything was 3 minutes too early because YouTube changed it to local time when you set it. Hi Sylvian. So I hope names are, hopefully I didn't slander your name. Hi Gary, thanks for the feedback. So before we start with the actual content, I also want to start with events. So if you have Delphi events, send them to me. So I might not be aware of certain Delphi events that are going on in the community. Of course, the big thing in 2 weeks' time, I think February 14th to 16th. February 14th is not only Valentine's Day, it's also the birthday of Delphi. And this year, Delphi is turning 28. I can't believe it. Am I really that old? Well, I guess I am. DelphiCon 2023. Great sessions. The agenda has already been posted. And there you can also interact with everybody. Use the chance to ask people your questions at the end of their sessions. Some people might even present their sessions live. I'm not sure. I sadly won't be there on the day, but I've got a great person answering your questions. So I'll be talking about how to visualize data from FireDAC, from a FireDAC database. I'm going to use a SQLite database actually. So you will be able to use or see another example for what we go into today on that day. So it will help you to basically harden the knowledge what you learned today. And I'm going to visualize points on a map. Not only points, I'm only going to use clustering, which summarizes multiple markers on a map, sums up the number, and then if you zoom in, you get all the detailed positionings. So that's what my session is going to be about. But there's also great sessions from Marco Cantu, Jim McKeith, Marco, of course, the Delphi guy right now with regards to the language. I'm sure he has great stuff with new language enhancements. My buddy Ian from Texas still, he has great sessions that are really, really hands-on as well, because I know for a fact he uses Delphi every day, just like I do. So his tricks, as he calls it here, every app trick in the book, he actually has 2 sessions. He also has one, why do we use or how do you use Delphi in the real fight and how we win these fights. So great session from him there as well. So thank you for the feedback with the sound. Swift expat, that's interesting, because Swift is, I think Apple's #1 language right now when it comes to iOS development, or it doesn't refer to that. I don't know. So going on to another event this week, actually, from TMS, they have a webinar about their new memo control, which basically gets the editor from Visual Studio Code into your VCL, FireMonkey, and web applications. It's a great control. They have some magic going on to basically use an existing JavaScript library that gives you the features of the Visual Studio Code editor. Actually, Visual Studio Code uses that exact piece of software as well. And this component allows you to use things like auto-completion, syntax highlighting out of the box. There's also a video that I created a couple of weeks ago previewing this component. So it's released now. It's available for everybody for you to test as a trial or for existing customers in this webinar on Tuesday, February 7th. It's actually next week. I thought it was Thursday this week. So Tuesday, February 7th at 3 p.m. UTC, whatever that is. For me, it's 10 a.m. local time. Go to this link right here and you get the local time, register. It's going to be a great event as well. Those are the two events that I wanted to refer to. If you have more in the future, point them out to me. Send me a link on Twitter if an event is being announced or something. I'm open to give a reference to everything. So we can start with the actual topic of the day, how to get started with FireDAC and SQLite. And SQLite is, if you look on your computer, I would say it's one of the most popular databases that's being used without you even realizing that software uses it. For example, the iPhone right here, where is it? Where's the camera? Right here. The iPhone uses SQLite as their internal database. So if you ever have written an iOS application, SQLite comes with every application out of the box. And you can use it to store local data. So it's a great alternative. I don't want to compare it to INI files, but it is being used for local data quite often. And FireDAC makes it really, really easy to take advantage of this local database. And for the Delphi developers here that don't have a enterprise or architect, well, you can use it. It is a local database, so it's fully included, accessible with FireDAC, even in the professional. So what I showed today is actually appropriate for all the Delphi editions out there. And the agenda is I'm going to be tinkering in Delphi 11. I'm going to open an existing database. I'm going to create a new database. It's actually not that difficult, don't worry. And I'm going to give you some essential hints how to get started, where to read more, because you could literally do a whole day. And as I said, I don't want to take too much of your time. I want to trigger your interest. I want to get you started on a topic. And maybe you get back to me and say, hey, can you focus on this or that? And we'll do another How It Works with Holger on that. So the tooling is also very important. You need to be able to look at the database outside of the IDE or outside of your application. And then you can use the chat to ask your questions if there are any. If there are general questions, just send them in the chat. Just be aware, I don't think with the amount of people in the chat, I don't have to be afraid of that. But if there is spamming or if there's like profanities and stuff, I have a one strike policy. I can't keep a list with warnings, so people who don't behave will be basically banned from the chat. And because I can't keep track, I don't have a moderator. So everybody wants to enjoy the experience, so we don't need anybody disturbing us doing that. So tinkering in Delphi 11, and when we start Delphi 11 right here, we start that. The most important thing is to set up SQLite. And if you go to the web page from SQLite right here to the home, it might be a little bit confusing what to download because there is so much stuff there. The easiest thing to do is to look for the DLL and then precompiled binaries for Windows and make sure it's the 32-bit DLL. Obviously, you can use the 64-bit DLL if your Delphi runtime is 64-bit. No worries about that. However, remember that Delphi itself, the Red Studio exe, is a 32-bit binary. That means in order to use the design time support inside of the IDE, you need to copy the 32-bit DLL and make it accessible to Delphi. And make it accessible means that Delphi does not find a library that is named SQLite 3.dll. They have the same name, that's the problem, that is 64-bit, because that would be incompatible. To prevent that, I know that some people say never copy anything into the Delphi binary directory, but that's exactly what I do. If I look with everything, the greatest tool for search ever built, SQLite 3.dll, you can see that I copied it into my Embarcadero Studio 22 binary directory. That's the easiest way to make Delphi access SQLite at design time. At runtime, of course, it either needs to be in the application directory in the path, so that the running application can access it. And then, of course, if you compile your application as a 64-bit, you can put the 64-bit DLL there as well. The easiest way, honestly, either download this DLL here, precompiled binaries, or if you already use Heidi SQL, a lot of Delphi developers use it because it is written in Delphi itself, and gives access to MySQL and SQLite now as well. So Ansgar is working on that support. However, I still think it is built for a database like MySQL, Microsoft SQL, Postgres. Those are supported as well now. MariaDB. I think I'll show you another tool I think is better for SQLite right now. So I just use Heidi SQL, to be honest, to hijack the SQLite 3.dll for my Delphi whenever I install a new Delphi version. Just be aware to use x86 for the 32-bit. Okay, so that's the setup that FireDAC is available in Delphi. And then, let me see here, I use a lot of Microsoft Access. Yeah, I think you would have a lot of advantages with SQLite because with regards to Microsoft Access, as far as I know, you need to install Microsoft Access on that machine, or at least the runtime from Microsoft, and the licensing from Microsoft Access is different. I don't know the correct legal terms, how these licenses are different, but I think SQLite is something you can distribute with your software commercially and non-commercially, and Access, you would have to make your customers buy Access as well, as far as I know. So that is the biggest advantage for me. And the size, I mean, just look at this, the size of this SQLite 3DB, it's a megabyte for a database server. Another advantage with, if you have SQLite 3 on your computer with Delphi, FireDAC offers a feature which is called local SQL. And what that does is that you can run SQL statements on your queries from whatever data set they may come, like Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres. And then you have these result sets on your computer and you want to run an additional query, but you don't want to go back to the server. Then you can use something that is called local SQL. And this uses internally a SQLite memory table, I would assume, in order to run those queries on your data set. So it's definitely worth looking at SQLite in this regard. Okay, and you say like there is no license for MS Access necessary if you use FireDAC. Perfect, then you can create the files automatically. And then SwiftXpat says, with regards to SQLite, the SQL window functions would be an advantage for him. Okay, I haven't looked at those in detail yet, but thank you for that hint. Okay, so this is the start screen from Delphi. I already prepared starting point, which should make the form a little bit bigger for you so you don't have the problem with, so we go to examples, source. So this is also what you'll get. You get the, in GitHub, you get the source, the PowerPoint, and the binary directory where the sources are going to be created. I'm going to use starting point VCL. I can save it as something else, most likely. And here's the form. The font is a little bit bigger so that you can see it. So literally an empty VCL application. And with FireDAC, we always start with the FD connection to build a connection to a database. Same with MS Access, as you said. Just instead of picking MS Access, you pick SQLite. That's the first. And then if you want to build queries, the component is FD query, of course, right here. And if you drop them, I'm also going to give a little bit of a FireDAC basics introduction because a lot of people still don't use FireDAC. I don't know why. I can understand it if it's like because of migration. I get it. But if you start a new project, I would always give FireDAC a chance because it's brilliant. And it's bundled with Delphi, so I'm a fan of FireDAC. I got to be honest. I started with the BDE. I never really got comfortable with DBX and the stuff that was there in between. I used like the Z components, they were called, like the Z Connect and for MySQL, these kind of things. I never used Zeos, they were called Zeos. Those were the controls. And then I immediately switched to FireDAC back in the day. Okay, so the connection, and we double click on the connection and can then select the driver ID, which for SQLite has to be SQLite. And we're not going to use a connection definition name, but because it's so easy to set up a SQLite connection, you literally just need to select the database property and select an existing database if you have one. So let's do that right here. And again, in our examples, I didn't. Okay, here I have the HERDAT, which is hurricane data, which is a free database. And I asked the creators of the database, of the data, if I was allowed to use this, and I was gladly given permission to do so. The next thing we want to look at is the open mode. And that determines what happens, how it's being opened. And you have like create UTF-8 means if the database doesn't exist, create it with UTF-8. And read-write means you open it for read-write access. However, if it doesn't exist, throw an exception. That's the difference. Read-only is self-explanatory. So create UTF-8 is the default. Encrypt has gotten a little bit difficult. I'm not going to go into details there. It's always been a separate module of SQLite, and there have been some licensing changes for the encryption, so I'm not going to focus on that. Important is the locking mode, especially if you develop with a SQLite database. It's file-based. So if you select exclusive, that means Delphi, as soon as you connect, has an exclusive lock on the file, and you can't use any of the tooling around it to access. So I would always use normal. And with synchronous, that has also some impact when it comes to full, normal, off. Please refer to the documentation in case you want to access a database at the same time, what impact the different settings have. Journal mode is very important, especially if you want to import a huge amount of data into a new SQLite database, because the journal is being kept. It's kind of like a history or a logbook of operations. And if you set it to delete, it means all the delete operations and that kind of stuff is being, basically all the operations are being kept in a journal. If you select delete, truncate, persist, memory only keeps the journal in memory. That means as soon as you close the database or close your application, the journal disappears. It's very fast. For huge import, when you don't have to go back to a previous state of your database, I simply set it to off. That's what I do. Foreign keys enabled by default, and string format by default now is Unicode, but you can force ANSI here. And the next ones I explain when we've looked at an actual SQLite database. So that's all we need to do. We connect to the database and okay, that's it. So now we're already connected to the database, and with query, we now have the chance to execute a query on this database. For example, I know that there's a headers table in there. Select star from headers, and let's do limit 100. And there's enter your credentials. Do we have credentials for a SQLite database? No, we don't. And so with that, I'm going to click OK. If you click just escape, the SQL statement will be gone. It's like the worst implementation for FireDAC for me, because I always use my changes to a SQL statement at design time. So let's click OK and fix this by going to login prompt, and we unselect that. Another important setting is something that didn't exist with the DBE. You can set if your connection is going to be set at runtime the same as it is at design time. So this would mean now we are connected to true. If we want to transfer this state to runtime, we would keep this checked, but we don't want this. I always want my connections not connected when my application starts. The reason is we have our hard-coded file name in there right now. And if I were to connect right away when my application starts, it would always go to drive G and this database. That might not be the behavior that I want, right? So I most likely want something, a relative path to my application directory, for example. And that is something I'll show you can do very easily. And this way, you can keep your design time completely separate from your runtime. You set your path like it is at design time, and you can design your queries easily without having to worry about where your database is at runtime. Okay, let's look at the database, at the tooling, because of course there's the Data Explorer right here, but honestly I always prefer tools that are specifically designed for a certain database. And I also have it in the slides here, by the way, the different SQLite, the FireDAC specific documentation. I also thought I had the SQLite Studio in there, the link. I'll add that after the broadcast. So this is SQLite Studio, free software, and you can simply add a database to this tree here, and then you see all the tables, all the views, and can design the table like you're used to from other database tools, and it will generate the SQL for you. Nice is if I go to this table, it even shows me the SQL that I would have to use in order to create a database. And that's literally how you would go ahead if you wanted to create a database in code with SQLite with FireDAC. You would, if you don't have the database, or if a table doesn't exist, you can also say create table if not exists, as far as I know, and then you can literally create the tables when needed. The key is to remember that the connection is able to create the actual database file, and then you can run SQL scripts to create the tables or update the tables, alter table, and these kind of things. That is one of the biggest limitations for me when it comes to SQLite. Not to go too far off topic, there are some restrictions when it comes to modifying tables compared to bigger server-based database systems. So SQLite has some restrictions there. That is something that has been an obstacle for me. But if you've worked with Firebird, for example, you're used to it in a way, because Firebird is based on Interbase. If you have a certain thing set, it is very difficult to change. And usually you have to create a copy of, you basically have to create a new table with the data that you have, delete the original table, and then rename the old table. So that might be a little bit more cumbersome if you've worked with other databases before. So the big thing here is, if you look at the types, that's literally what I want to focus on, because that is one of those hints when you get started with SQLite that is going to break your neck right away. So you're going to look at the structure and you see something like integer, character, integer, var character, so something that you know from other databases. The thing is, and this is what you find in the document right here, when you go to data types in SQLite, they only have these five basic types. They have null, that means the value is a null value. You have integer, real, text, and blob. And you might wonder, where is, like, as you just saw, variable character or just a character? Doesn't exist. There is like an integer, which is basically a number without any decimals. And then there is a real, which is float in other databases. That's it. And text is a string. It doesn't matter how long, basically you set the length of the string. SQLite takes care of managing it. You have no influence on saying this is a variable character or this is a character. You can't do that. It's just text. And blob is just binary data. And this is exactly where it becomes tricky to get started with SQLite and Delphi, because there has to be a mapping of these data types to the Delphi types, obviously. Also, and this is what took quite some time for me to work myself into, and this is why I'm doing it for you in this way, you can name them whatever you want. That is the thing that you just have to remember. Like, for example, here, if I go here, varchar 10 and character 2, those are things that you can use inside of your SQL statements, and they're being mapped to these standard types internally. SQLite is that smart. And why would you do that? Why wouldn't you use just integer, real, text, and blob? Why would you go this extra mile and do it like this? Well, that's exactly the reason. With FireDAC, if you go into the documentation from Embarcadero, at the end, I don't know why they put it at the end, because for me it's like the most important thing that I need to know first. The data types, because as they say here, SQLite has a typeless data type system. Everything is the same, more or less. So if you use a type name inside of your create statement in your table structure of SQLite, the right side shows you here what it is being mapped to. So what this means, if you want to have a double inside of Delphi, you either have to write real, float, or double in your create or alter table statement or whatever, okay? The SQL is here on the left side. This is what it matches up to. This is all very simple if you just look at the standard. For example, Boolean has so many options: bit, bool, Boolean, logical, yes, no. It all becomes a Boolean in Delphi. The key thing to remember is that these are really names that are inside of the FireDAC documentation. That, as it says here, FireDAC recognizes data type names as described in the following table. This is a convention that FireDAC made for us. It also means, if you look at, for example, blob, the blob data type for binary data, you can use any of those. There's no distinction. It's always the same thing. Not like in other database systems like MySQL explicitly distinguishes between blob, medium blob, large blob, long blob. It's all different. Not with SQLite. It's all the same thing. and it will always become a blob. And the database system manages these types. And now the tricky part. By default, text is being matched to memo because a string can be so long that the FireDAC developers decided we match this to memo. And that would mean if you declare a text inside your SQLite database and show this in a grid, you get just these parentheses, memo. You don't get the actual content if you don't write additional code. So if you know that you want to use a database with Delphi, don't use just text or any of these. Instead, look here what you can use in order to actually get a string. And that should be right. I'm just blind right now. That's how it is when you're here. Here it is. You just use varchar or char. And of course, this implies ANSI. And this is an nchar or nvarchar2 or nvarchar. These automatically go to white string. However, I'm very, very certain, because I use varchar all the time, and because you can set in the connection what your strings should be default to. If I set varchar and set that to Unicode, it gets to white string and not to ANSI string. But that is something you can check very, very easily. If you go here, and we have our statement, which is select star from headers. Let's look at the headers table. We have a character and we have a var character inside of this headers table. Right click, fields editor, and then we say add all fields. And then we get the mapping. So we have the auto increment field, we have a string field, integer field, and string field. So guess what? It is not interpreted as Unicode because we didn't set in the connection that strings by default should be Unicode. So if I wanted Unicode inside these fields, I would have had to use nchar and nvarchar for the mapping to be correct. So I think that is the biggest obstacle, to be honest with you, this type mapping, that you get the correct type in your database, so to speak, or in Delphi, that you can work with these values. However, everything else is straightforward after this, after taking these hurdles, in my opinion. Now, one more hint how to get started at runtime. Something I missed completely for a long time. Let's say we have here the connection, and I'm just going to put it in the form create, and we set the connection is closed. And let's say you have your database. Let's go into the here examples, and my executable is created in the binary directory. Hopefully, if I compile this here, I set it up this way. So now, no, I haven't set it up this way. So project options. And I'm going to say, hey, create everything in the binary directory. How can I do that? Go to the Delphi compiler, all configurations, and then the output directory is .bin, because I'm in the source directory and I want to go back one. So .bin. Compile again. And now I have in my binary directory the executable here. If I'm going too fast, chat, let me know. I will go slower if you want me to. So the database so far isn't anywhere. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this database, copy onto the clipboard, and I'm going to do binary. This is where my application is, and I'm going to do a subdirectory in there, folder db, for example. And that's why I'm going to put the database as a subdirectory of my binary directory. It can be anything, really, okay? I'm just trying to give you a hint here with the different constants that we have, because you have multiple options now to do this. In newer Delphi versions, you can use system IOUtil. And IOUtils then is able to combine paths. So you have your, for example, you can do tpath.combine. And what do you want to combine? Tpath also has get library path, which is the path of your application where the executable is. And you can simply say comma dot backslash db and then the name of your database. So that way you would have the name of the database completely variable where your application is installed to, and it will always be the subfolder db with har.db. And what do you assign that to? To the connection dot params, and then you have the database. That's the file name. That's how easy it is with SQLite. And that is all you would need to do in modern Delphi to set the database up correctly. However, some people don't have IO utils yet. FireDAC helps you there as well, because FireDAC has constants and that it can replace inside of its file name specification, so to speak. So you can actually say, instead of specifying get library path, you can literally say $app, and then in braces app, and then you can say db or db. That's what it is. So this way you can get the running application directory replaced by FireDAC. FireDAC has more than these, and let me look in the #1 reference for FireDAC. I always refer to the book by Kerry Jensen, and he has a list of all the different constants that are available, because I can't remember them all, I gotta be honest. There's different ones, and I think I should have prepared this better. And let's see, I think it's right here. There's a few. There's not only the one that I just listed, there's more than this one. Let's see if I can find it right away. Otherwise, we'll have to look it up yourself in the. It's in the chapter with the. Here it is. I found it. So we have, as I said, app is actually not called. That's why I looked here. It's actually called run, because it's the application executable is dollar and then braces run. And then we also have doc for the documents directory of the common user. And then we have temp, and we have rand, which is a random integer number, not useful in order to reference. And then we also have next, which is very cool. If you create databases, you can use this next if you want to create like hard.1, hard.2, hard.3. Automatically, you can use this $next. Very, very cool. The question here in the chat is, can we still use the connection string? Yes, you can. A connection string is still supported by FireDAC. Here, it's connection.connectionString. And then you have to look up in the documentation what they're called. Usually the connection string contains the same key value pairs that you would normally put in your definition file. What is the definition file? If you go here, Tools, FireDAC Explorer, these are the default definitions. For example, here the employee, and you find them if you go to open condef file. That's the easiest way to get there, I thought. Basically, you can open another condef file. Let's see where the FireDAC, what is it called? FireDAC fd connection defs.ini, here it is. And then if we go here, that's the default file. So the connection string, for example, for the SQLite demo here, would list these and you would simply concatenate them like this. Okay, that's what you would use as a connection string. You can also use these and just set them. The params property is also a t-strings or t-string list. So you can simply assign a string list with these key value pairs in order to create your connection. That's all possible. It's very, very flexible to do. Why the dot and t path instead of just backslash? Well, here's the thing. I never know if get library path ends with a backslash or without a backslash. So in this case, I always reference it in a way that the combine understands it, that it has to use the get library path within the same directory and then db. So if I write this with combine, I think it would be fine. I agree. I just want to emphasize that I want to stay in the same directory that I'm in and then go on. You're perfectly fine by leaving that out. I agree with you. Okay, yeah, it's FireDAC really has, because it just Sylvian just commented that, or Sylvain, sorry, just commented that that's perfect with the connection string. Yes, so FireDAC is very, very flexible when it comes to building your connections. In my books, I have multiple examples how you can read these things, and then it is also very, very easy to create a connection definition that is not persistent, meaning you create a connection name, and then instead of, if you have multiple connections, you can use the connection definition name, which is a name that you create in memory, and that way you don't have to specify the connection parameters over and over and over again, especially when it comes to web services and connection pooling. That is essential. Yes, a dot always keeps. This is always where I know how old I am. Especially when I started preparing the stream. Everybody seemed to be 10 years old and telling me how easy it is to do this live streaming. And I'm like, well, it's not easy for me if you're 40 years plus, you know? So remember back in the day, we have cd ... to go in the directory above. But if you look at directory closely, there's also the dot, and that is the current directory. So if you do cd dot, you stay in the same directory. So you can also do cd dot Holger in this case, and then you go into the directory from the current directory, one up. Whereas if I do cd public, I go one down, and then from there into the public directory. But not to totally, you can also do this. It should be fine too. Basically repeat. It's a recursion, I would think. See, you can add as many dots as you want. Also, nowadays in Windows, as you see, you can use the normal slash. You no longer have to use the backslash. All these things have become much, much easier with Windows in recent years. The final thing for today is I would like to feature one more thing that is very, very great with SQLite, the ability to use it in memory only. So if you want to, a lot of people use data structures, and data structures can sometimes get very, very complex. And if you want to do something in memory with SQL statements, sometimes a SQL memory database is the answer, especially for if you create test data for test cases. That might be the way to go. And I think, again, I didn't look this up before, of course, memory. Here is like your internal or temporary databases for programs sifting and sorting data in various ways. Can be simpler loading data into the in-memory SQLite database. And it is very simple that in the connection string, I think here it is, the database name simply becomes : memory : That means the database is being created in memory. You don't even need anything on file. And then all the operations that you do are in memory and really, really fast. So that is something if you need to sort something or aggregates, building aggregate sums of categories grouped by, everything is supported. And that is how I round everything up. I want to show you the operations that it can do. If we go to the documentation, then you find the SQL syntax. Everything you're used to from the big databases is there. You have alter table with some restrictions, as I said, but you have like create table, create index. You have triggers, you have views. Views are very, very powerful in SQLite. Imagine you use those on a memory table in order to create certain views on your data. And then in Delphi, you simply have a couple of grids, connect them to those views, and you present or reports. And that is all very, very comfortable using SQLite in memory or even on file. I mean, there's nothing against storing things in a file. So that's it for the first episode, just to get you started with SQLite. Of course, we could do hours and hours more displaying. There's no difference displaying it in a grid now because you simply connect your data source and you're back in the Delphi world. But to get these first steps, I think it's very, very essential to know about the data types, about the mapping, about that the database is created automatically, that you don't have to create it in a special way, and then to send the create statement and all that kind of stuff is very, very straightforward with SQLite. Any questions in the chat that I can answer? So far, there is no more questions with regards to the directory. No. Just browsing the chat if I missed anything. No, I think we've covered it all. I think the next how it works with Holger Live will be another one just with me because I haven't figured out yet how to invite guests. However, I can say that at some point, Wagner Landgraf already said he's going to be here to look at one of his business products from TMS, like web services, object relational mapping, these kind of things. It would also be great if you shoot me in the comment section topics that you're interested in that we can talk about. And now the questions are flooding in. I'm not going anywhere. Don't worry. Yes. Connection strings were widely documented from Microsoft SQL, MySQL, and Microsoft Access, but seems to be obsolete usage. Well, it's not really obsolete because you can configure all the different settings. FireDAC is really cool here. If you double click on the connection, you literally get all the, after setting the driver ID, you get all the different key value pairs that are available. So for example, the string format, foreign keys, journal mode, you can put all those things in the connection string or don't need to because here are the defaults. Okay, so one thing I potentially forgot, I always forget this with FireDAC because for whatever reason, these things work out of the box for me, but some people say, oh, as I didn't do that, you need to drop the TFD physical SQL driver link on your form because that makes certain that the units are being compiled into the executable, and this is the major. You could, if you wanted to, you could specify the location of your library because in the beginning I said like be careful with path that it's the correct CPU type, but this way you can prevent that from happening because this way you specify where FireDAC is supposed to look. Also, you see the base driver ID, just to explain how this works, this driver link here. You can also then specify another driver ID, for example, Holger SQLite, and then say for example, you can also say, I want the engine linkage static. That means the SQLite DLL is becoming part of my executable. Then I don't need to deploy my SQLite3.dll, but I need to specify where it is. And in order to use that for my connection, I no longer specify SQLite as my driver. I go to the connection. And now I should be able to, hopefully this works live, right? Holger SQLite, there you go. And that way you then told Delphi, link the DLL, the SQLite 3 DLL into my executable and tell it where it is so it knows where to link it in from, and you have no dependency on any DLLs anymore. That's a new feature. I think they introduced that with Rio or the one after Rio. I'm not sure, but that's a pretty cool feature to have with SQLite. I use Delphi Pro with Default Unideck. They have a virtual table and a virtual query that I use for test data. They found it is supported by, yes. I'm quite sure that any other database framework apart from FireDAC, as long as they use, as they provide access to SQLite, the graphical controls that you have, no matter from which component set they are, will work as long as they implement the data source. That's the great thing about Delphi. Could we open the same database by 2 instances of an application? Yes, you could do that. As long as you remember to, here we go, if you go onto the connection, right here, the locking mode. If you set it here, like I do, to exclusive, let's just run the application and see what happens. I mean, this is, so this database right now is open, which one is it? So let's disconnect. This is the one in drive G, right? This is the one. So as soon as you open 2 at the same time, it's hard for me to reproduce now, and you set this to exclusive, that means that Delphi wants an inclusive lock on this file. So if you have it already open somewhere else, which it should be here right now, so we have the exclusive lock, it should not be possible. I opened the other one here in the SQLite browser to open it at the same time. So in locking mode, you have to go to normal, and then you also have to configure the synchronous access, which we simply set to full or normal. Please look in the documentation what the exact differences are. But that is something you need to set. And this is another reason why you should use a configuration file or a connection string, because those are not, you won't find, as it is a variable here, you won't find like a connection.params.synchronous or whatever. Instead, params is your, where you can load the params as a string here, as you can see, add strings, where you can then add key value pairs for the configuration of your connection. Or you set it at design time, or you use the connection string, as we said. Okay, so thank you. I appreciate that you point out that you like the linkage stuff. It's pretty new and sadly not very prominent in the documentation. That's all I can say. Even I forgot about it preparing for this first live stream today because it's so well hidden. So we have the driver link, and you also have different components here. To be 100% truthful, I have never used these components yet, because as soon as I do something with the database, I do it with the tools provided by SQLite and not out of the IDE. Another question is, for a connection string, previous ADO version generated the connection string. Yes, it is definitely a little deeper, because the connection itself can use any database, and FireDAC, I love how FireDAC implements this using a t-string list, because a t-string list is very easy to create, and a t-string list is also very easy to load from INI files. If you're concerned about security, INI files can be encrypted, so these things make it very easy to use databases as I said in one of my books, I even show how you can use a web application to configure a database for a web service application. The web application is only accessible locally, so the administrator can do the database setup, the web service setup, and then also start the web service. Again, the web application is only accessible locally for the administrator, and that way you have a configurable web service using Delphi only, because the web server itself is also running from the same application that provides the web services if needed. And that is the final thing I would like to do, because, let's see, switch to this. Whoops, perfect. I love it. Because I would like to point out that if you like this today, please if you don't know about it, I've written books. I've written a book about TMS Web Core, and I have written 3 hands-on books about FNC maps. That is something I'm also going to talk about on the conference, but also for multi-tiered applications, for web and desktop applications, REST server and reporting, and finally another example how to do cross multi-tier development, cross-platform with different platforms like mobile, web, and BCL. So these 3 books give you plenty of more examples with Delphi, and they're all available. I won't make any more advertisement, promise, because there's also courses I have online, but they have nothing to do with SQLite, so I'm not going to feature those today. So thank you again for your interest in the first episode of How It Works with Holger Live. I appreciate all your comments. Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking questions in the chat. It really showed that there was an interest in the particular topic. And if you have a follow-up topic for this, what you would like to see with SQLite, let me know. Just send me an email or a tweet or whatever. You must have found out about this live broadcast somewhere. I'm quite sure you'll be able to get in touch with me. Thank you so much for your interest, and see you soon. It's going to be a week or 2, depending on when the DelphiCon is. Obviously, I'm not going to compete with DelphiCon, and also I'm on vacation because it's Valentine's Day. I don't know, I'm married, so I couldn't explain to my wife that Valentine's Day is Delphi Day, so this year I won't be there for the conference. Thank you so much for all your support, and see you soon. Bye-bye.